Good morning. It was a great day yesterday, wasn't it? I was aware of something when I came into the church. Just got this morning. I was thinking about that. Kind of aware how much we take things for granted. You know, we came in here yesterday afternoon. There's a nice carpet down there. I thought, hey, that's nice. There's a nice little floral arch. I thought, that's pretty. And all the chairs were stacked to the back. And then we go down in the evening and there's a cake. It's at the back there now, isn't it? Covered up. But there's a cake that is the most jaw-droppingly brilliant cake I've ever seen. The balloons all over. There's amazing catering. But it's all been done, I'm assuming, it's all been done by people in the church. When we have a focus of something to do and people get behind it, it doesn't really matter who laid that down, who did the arch. We know who did certain things and we don't know who did other stuff. But we're all, when we've got a task and we all chip into it, what an amazing thing we get done. We produce an amazing day by all coming together and doing their little bit, whatever that was. And we're called to a job, aren't we? We just saw it. We're sent. We are called to do something. And we're all required to chip in. We all have a part to play in. And the reason I'm saying that, today's message, I'm just going to put that up, just a reminder where we are. Step 5 of the 12-step series. I love doing the 12 steps. I love it. You know, I'm just sold on it, on the structure of it, and I get so much out of it just by preparing it. But sometimes there are steps that are tougher than others. And guess what? Coincidentally, after a great day yesterday, it's down to earth here. Step 5 is the one I struggle with most because it's tough, it's hard work, and it's challenging. But the importance of it is that we need to do it, not only because we can't skip a step, otherwise the next one doesn't make any sense, but because we've got to get stuff sorted. So first of all, let me just summarize where we're up to so far. We've done steps 1 to 3. Those are the foundation steps. You know, step 1, our way doesn't work. Step 2, God's way does. So step 3, we're going to do it God's way. Those are the foundations. We never lose those. We put those in place and we stand. We build everything on those. So we've moved from that. Step 4 last month. And step 4, we talked about doing a moral inventory. A stock take of what's going on in your life. And I compared that with like going into your kitchen cupboard where you want to find out before you do anything, before you go shopping or whatever, what's actually there. What have you got that you can use and what's the stuff that's got to go? So we find the stuff in that cupboard, we think, oh, I never knew I had that. Well, I'll make a meal out of that. Or there's stuff that's past its sell-by date. Well, I'll get rid of that. And I was saying, well, that's what we do with ourselves here. That's what we do. We look at what's in the stock cupboard. What strengths have we got? Well, I'm a good communicator, or I write letters well, or I'm a good administrator, or I've got a heart for young people. And we look at the negative stuff too. Yeah, I've got this anger problem, and I've got this insecurity in this area of my life, or whatever. We find all that. And I suggested it's almost like, you put it down on a little list like that. On the one side, positives, or assets, all the good stuff. And that's what I focused on last month, all the stuff that we might otherwise miss, this desire that we've got just to be more than, to make a difference. If you've got that in your life, that's an asset. You have a heart that wants to be more than, to do something. And then there's the negatives. And I said I wouldn't give you any help with that because I think we're good enough about beating ourselves up. We can find all the negatives in us. So we focused last month on the positives. So if we've got these two lists, we've got these things that we know are good, that are positive, and we've got the things that we know are negative. There's something then that follows from that, isn't there? And that's where step 5 takes us. We've actually got to do something with them. We've actually got to do something with them. No point in taking stuff out your stock cupboard and looking at it and thinking, oh yeah, I've got that, and then putting it back. And just forgetting about it, shutting the door and moving on. You've actually got to do something about it. All this stuff that we put down on the list, the negatives, the positives, and so on. We've actually got to do something with it. So what do we do with them? We can't do nothing. Well, what do we do with the assets, the good stuff that we find? That's dead simple. We give it to God, don't we? We give it to God. We say, look, okay, I'm a good communicator, but what do you want me to do with that? How do you want me to use that? Not how I think I ought to use it. I'm not trying to build a ministry. We're not trying to build something. Because step 1 tells us that if we try to build it in our own strength, it will fail. So all the stuff that you think that you've got in there, a heart for young people, there you are, God. What do you want to do with that? Not what I think you should do with me, but what do you think? Because sometimes God will take something you've found in that stock cupboard and use it there and then, but sometimes he may wait or not use it at all. Who knows? We just hand it over to God. So all the assets that you find, you give to God. And it's the same principle as the kid giving his fish lunch to Jesus, isn't it? What are you going to do with these loaves and fish? Well, I'm going to multiply it and feed 5,000. You put it, what you've got, into Jesus' hands and see what he does with it. Fair enough? That's nice and simple. But of course there's another column. A column of negatives. What are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with the negatives that we find? Well, it's very tempting to look at that and say, I tell you what, let's do the same with them. Let's give them to God. But that's where it doesn't quite work as easily, I'm afraid. I wish it did. I wish we could take all the weaknesses that we've got and just give them to God and say, there you are, you deal with them. That would be really nice. It would also be incredibly simple and too super spiritual. And Christians, I'm afraid, are very good at being super spiritual. We tend to say, oh, I've got this problem. Pray about it. Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, fine, no argument with that. But it's almost like, well, that's sorted then, isn't it? I've got this problem, I've got this anger issue. Give it to God. Oh, well, that's that one sorted. And it would be so nice if God would just take all this negative stuff and take it away. We'd have no problems. But we know that the reality is, it's a struggle, isn't it? Sometimes you've got to work at things. You can't just say, take it away. We have to do something, and that's really where step 5 takes us. Not just doing nothing, not putting it back in the stock cupboard, and not simply saying, go on, God, deal with it, but actually doing something with it. So let's have a look at where step 5 takes us. I think we've got to go that way, wrong way, that's it. Step 5 says this: we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. See why this is a tougher step than the others? Because last month I could focus on the positives, but we can't ignore the negatives, and step 5 focuses on the negatives. What are we going to do with the bad stuff? And it tells us to do something. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So therefore, the key word probably is confession. Now, I know confession gets a bit of a bad press, doesn't it, because of what the Catholics have done to it. But there's nothing wrong with the principle. What they've done is to turn a good principle into a ritual, going into a little box with a priest and saying sort of particular words, and then the priest telling you what to do. There's none of that. But confession is a great principle. Telling people the nature of what you've discovered in that stock take. Now, there are 3 things there that might sort of make people question a bit. We confessed to ourselves. Now, hang on, wait a minute, you might think, wait a minute, why do I need to confess to what's that talking about? Why do I need to confess to myself? I found this negative, this anger problem, I recognize it, why do I need to confess to it? I know it. But there's something about it, isn't it? It's very easy to understand negatives in yourself and then to kind of dismiss them. Oh yeah, I'm just an angry person. Oh yeah, have you had anybody come up to you and apologize? You know, I really hurt you. Oh, I'm sorry about that. And they just kind of wave at you. I'm sorry about that. And then they walk off. And you think, hang on. It's not enough just to speak the words, just to acknowledge it. There's something more about confessing to yourself that we need to grasp here. And that's to acknowledge that what you did, what you've done, the negative you found into was your choice. It's no good just dismissing it as if it doesn't matter. We have to dwell on it by confessing it to ourselves. And the same with confessing it to God. You think, hang on, why do I need to do that? God already knows. Yeah, but take ownership. That's the word these days, isn't it? Take ownership of it. When you did that something that you know was wrong, you did it. Not anybody else. You chose to do it. It was your choice. Nobody put a gun to your head or twisted your arm up your back. You chose to do it. And what's more, you took God with you. When you watch that film that you know you shouldn't have watched, nobody forced you. You did it, and you need to understand that you did it, and you need to recognize that you did it. And you also took the Holy Spirit with you, because it lives in you. So what it is, confessing to yourself and to God, is basically saying, take it seriously. We're sometimes not very serious about the negative stuff in our life. And as we've said at the start, we've got a job to do. And that job is too important for us to be weighed down by stuff that we're not dealing with. It causes a problem. So this is serious stuff. We're talking about life and death here, because there is a world going to hell if we don't tell them. And so we cannot spend so much time just putting down, suppressing things that are wrong. We've got a guy in prison who does exactly this. He hasn't got it yet. He's making great progress, but he hasn't quite got it yet. The people in the prayer meeting will know who I'm talking about here. But he says stuff like, can you ask God, can you take away my anger problem because it comes from how I was treated as a child? No, he's recognized something. He's recognized he's got an anger problem, but that's not a big deal. He's in prison because he fights people. You don't have to be a genius to recognize you're an angry problem. You've got an anger problem if that's what you do. But it is so easy to say, well, I've got this anger problem. Take it away, God. Because it's not really my fault. It happened because of the way I was brought up. That is not confessing to yourself or to God. That is simply saying, I've got this problem, don't like it, don't want the consequence of it, so take it away. No, he has some work to do. And step 5 is about doing some work. Working on it, taking it seriously. So, there's a third part, and that's the one that we focus on. That's the first 2 bits, if you like. Confess to yourself and to God. Take it seriously. Deal with it. Understand it. But then confess to another human being. That brings up 3 questions. 1, why do we need to do that? I've confessed to me. I've understood it. I've confessed to God. Isn't that enough? Why do I need to confess to somebody else? Question 2, how do we do that? Who do we confess to? And thirdly, and this is where we really kind of move to the dark side, what happens if I don't? First one, okay? Why do we do it? Why do we need to do this? Do you want a simple answer to that question? Because God tells you to. God tells you to. That should answer the question, shouldn't it? God tells you to. James 5:16, therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. God tells you to do it. And if God tells you to do it, didn't we say in step 3 that that's what we're going to do? We're going to do what God says. We're going to do it his way, not our way. So if we agreed with that in step 3 and God suddenly tells us, well, tell people, confess. Unburden it, don't hang on to it. And God tells you to do it, well, we'll do it then. And in any case, if that's not enough, we should know that God tells us to do that because it's for our good, not because he wants to spoil our life or cause us problems. He wants our good. He wants us to be right. Proverbs 28:13, he who conceals his sins does not prosper, but whoever confesses them and renounces them finds mercy. Do you want to prosper? Yes. Right. Don't conceal it then. God doesn't want you to conceal it because he wants you to prosper. How difficult is this? It's just difficult for us to do, but then this step is about doing something, and we may not find it comfortable. That's why I said this is a tough step. It gets easier after this. 6 is easier. But this is a tough one. God tells you to do it, so do it. He tells you to do it because it's for your benefit, so he's got you on his mind. Second question. Who do you tell? Going back to the, leave that step up there. Who do you tell? Simple answer to that one as well. I don't know. I haven't got a clue. Doesn't matter really. The Catholics do the priest, use the priest. People in NA and in 12-step recovery programs, Alcoholics Anonymous and so on, have what they call a sponsor. They find somebody who has certain qualities. They're people who normally have done the 12 steps before them. They're in recovery, but they're further down the road than they are. So they kind of pick somebody who knows where they're coming from, but has a bit of experience in it. So perhaps you confess to another Christian because they know where you're coming from. Perhaps it's somebody who's a little bit further down the road than you. I don't know. Whatever works for you. I mean, personally, I find this idea of confessing to one person, having one person in your life that you tell your stuff to, you tell this stuff that's within you to, is a bit limiting. I find it a bit limiting. But also, I find if you had 20 or 30 people you were prepared to go to, you'd find too many conflicting voices. So personally, I think having a little group, half a dozen people who you trust and respect enough to know where you're coming from, to have your best interest at heart, to love you enough to tell you you're an idiot if necessary, because you don't want to simply tell people who are going to say, there, it's all right. You don't want to tell all your Facebook friends, because they'll simply say, give you a hug. And hugs sometimes don't do it. Sometimes you need a slap. Now, there's plenty of people out there who will hug you to death, but sometimes you need somebody who will slap you and say, hang on, that was wrong. You need to acknowledge that because I care enough about you not to want you to go down that road. So who do you tell? I don't know. We're not thinking of constructing a nice little magic box in the corner where Jamie can sit on one side behind a curtain and we can all confess to him. We're not going down that kind of route. But we have a pastoral team in the church. That's a good place to start, because presumably if anybody's joined the pastoral team, it's because they've got a heart to deal with people's issues exactly like this, so use them. But the point is, you have to have somebody. Otherwise, you hold stuff in and it causes you huge problems. It can tear you apart. We've had lots of guys come out of prison and they've made a connection with God and they've just got clean for a bit. And the first thing that people do when they come out of prison in some churches is say, here's a microphone, go and tell people your testimony. Because it's dramatic, all the stuff that you've done. So they stand in front of a congregation, they tell their testimony, and they get a thundering round of applause. And they think, this is good. I'm a celebrity. And so they carry on doing that. And every time they get rounds of applause, and they go into schools, and they tell people, and they think, yeah, I'm a superstar. And then they start to struggle with something in life, a relationship. They lapse, they use, they drink. And they dare not tell anybody because they think if I tell people, I'm going to lose the microphone. I'm going to lose my status. So I am going to pretend I'm all right. I'm going to act it out. And I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't want to lose my position. And that conflict within them tears them apart. And so many people are back in prison because they never dealt with it and because they allowed themselves, in a sense, and they were allowed to be torn apart, pulled two directions. So, we're right with that. Why do we do it? Because God says so. He's got our interest in heart. Who do we confess to? Doesn't really matter, as long as it's somebody. As long as you've got somebody in your world to talk to, make sure that you've got that. If you've got somebody you rely on that you can talk to and share this stuff with. But the third issue is a little bit tougher. It's this idea of what will happen if we don't. Well, what happens with guys in prison? I've just explained. Come down, you can tear them apart and they go back to prison. But that's extreme. What happens if we don't? Well, the answer again is very simple. Something will happen. And it won't necessarily be good. We just don't know what it is. And we know that's true because there is a law in operation that we cannot ignore. And the law says you will reap what you sow. And if you sow according to the Spirit, you will reap according to the Spirit. Good stuff. If you sow according to the flesh, you will reap destruction according to the flesh. So in other words, that's a law. Everybody knows that. Even non-Christians know that. They call it karma, or what goes around comes around. Everybody knows that that's the case. If you do the wrong thing, it will come back to bite you. We just don't know when and how. But you can't escape it. So what will happen if we don't? I don't know. But it won't be good. And there's a guy who illustrates that in the Old Testament. And I'll confess this one, that this is extreme. I thought, let's go for it. Let's not mess about with this one. Let's go for it. Let's have an extreme example of this. So I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen to you, but this guy is called Gehazi, and you find him in 2 Kings. And he is a servant to a big name Old Testament prophet called Elisha. And Elisha succeeded Elijah, another big name prophet. And there's rumored that Gehazi possibly, because he's more than a servant, he was a right-hand man to Elisha, may have even been set up to be to Elisha's successor. So in other words, he's a big player. He's right at the center of things. He's got the potential to be somebody significant. So there's a lot riding on him, and the Bible does say, to him who's given a lot will be expected. So he's got every opportunity to live a life that is amazing. But there's a problem. He's got a problem, and he's not letting on about it. There is something within him that he's not dealing with. And like a lot of problems, we don't see it straight away. We get hints to it. There's a story in 2 Kings chapter 4 about a woman from Shunem, a Shunammite woman who's a friend of Elisha and Gehazi. She and her husband look after them when in the area. And the Shunammite woman has a son, a blessing from God, a son. But he gets sick and he dies. And she's so convinced that this was a blessing from God that she leaves the husband with the child's body and goes in search of Elisha because she believes that Elisha will be able to do something, will be able to raise him from the dead. And in verse 25, 20 to 27, we read this, I think. There we go. She finds Elisha. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, "Look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, 'Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right?' 'Everything is all right,' she said. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away." Now, I can't put the whole story in there, but we see something here. Elisha sends Gehazi down to ask this woman, "Are you okay? Now, her son has just died. Is your son all right?" And she looks at Gehazi and says, "Everything's fine." Now, why does she do that? Why does she lie to him? Have you ever been in that situation where you talk to someone and you think, they're not right? You get this sense where you think, I'm not happy here. I don't trust this person. What they're saying is all right, but I get this strange sense about them. And I think that's what she sees in Gehazi here. Something not right. And so when he asks her, "Is your son all right?" she looks at him and says, "Everything's fine. I don't want to tell you. I don't feel right about you." And she swerves him, goes to Elisha, throws herself at his feet, and tells him. And that annoys Gehazi straight away. We see the problem. He pushes her away. His pride is hurt. He's not right. There's something not right here. But interestingly, Elisha doesn't see it. Don't believe because somebody is a man of God who has a title, a pastor of a church, that they have a greater deal of discernment than you do. There are some people who lead churches, in leadership-led churches, who think that. They think they've got the answer to everything. Nobody can tell them a thing. It's not actually true. We're all needed together. The Shunammite woman sees something in Gehazi that Elisha doesn't. In fact, Elisha then says to him, if we read on in the story, he sends Gehazi with his staff that symbolizes his authority. He says, you go, run down to this Shunammite woman's house, find the child's body, put the staff on his body, and he'll be raised to life. And Gehazi does it. See, we're on dangerous stuff here. Here's a guy who knows that something's wrong in him, but he's still trying to do God's work. He's still trying to put him right out there in matters of life and death, and that's sometimes dangerous. If you're working in the kingdom and you put your head out, you've got to deal with this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to head for problems. Because Gehazi does it. He runs to the child's body. He puts the staff on him. Nothing happens. He has to go back to Elisha and say, didn't work. And Elisha has to complete the job himself. Even that hint doesn't get him. There's Gehazi, a right-hand man to a servant, to a man of God, trying to do God's work, but he's not dealing with the stuff that's in him. And if we don't deal with it, and he's had every opportunity to deal with it, he's with Elisha day after day, it will come back and get him. And it does in the next chapter, in 2 Kings chapter 5, with the story of Naaman. Now, Naaman is a Syrian general, and Israel is having problems with Syrians on and off, and so a Syrian general like Naaman is a key player. But he's got his own problems, medical problems. Naaman suffers from leprosy. And one of his servants tells him to go to Elisha in Israel, and Elisha will help him be healed. And that's what happens. Elisha tells him to dip himself in the river Jordan 7 times, and on the 7th time he comes up, he'll be healed. And that's what he does. He gets healed of leprosy, and then he goes back to Elisha before he departs back to Syria to say thank you. And we read this. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel, so please accept a gift from your servant. The prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. Here is a guy now who's converted, a Syrian general who's converted, who comes to recognize who God is, goes back to Elisha and says, can I thank you? Can I give you some money? And Elisha says, no. As surely as the Lord lives who I serve, I will not accept a thing. He knows that you can't buy God's healing. You can't buy God's blessings. Despite what the prosperity gospel teachers tell you, you cannot buy the blessings of God. They come free. It's grace. So I will not accept a thing. And he also knows what a witness this will be when Naaman goes back to Syria, healed, and it didn't cost him a penny. He knows, he sees the bigger picture. And so off goes Naaman back to Syria. But then what's really going on in Gehazi rises up. And we see what's really going on. Because we read this a couple of verses lower. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. See the problem? It was there all along. It was never dealt with. It's now risen up. Elisha sees the bigger picture and God's at the center of it. Naaman sees the little picture and he's at the center of it. I will get something from him. This is about me. So many people out there who make even their faith and their ministry about them because they've not dealt with it. Do you sometimes wonder when you read in the papers about some church leader who's been done for fraud or whatever, and you think, wow, how did that happen? Didn't just wake up one morning and suddenly think, right, I'm going to do this terrible thing. It's been building up. Why did he not deal with it when the first signs were there? Well, Gehazi didn't either. Gehazi didn't. And now we see it I will run after him and get something from him. And he does. He runs after Naaman. He stops him. He lies to him. He tells him that 2 prophets have arrived. And that Elisha wants to give them a gift. So can I please have some money and a couple of suits of posh clothing? And Naaman's more than happy to give him it. And then Gehazi takes it home and hides it. But now the situation changes, and this is where it becomes serious. So I said this is extreme. Don't take this personally. This is where it becomes serious. Because God has had enough. Sometimes we can believe that God will be infinitely patient and allow us to carry on doing what we want to do forever until we decide. And I know that because remember, you're looking at somebody who chose, despite being a Christian, to go down the road of being an alcoholic. So I know this. You think that God is so forgiving that he will just allow you to do it forever. But sometimes God draws a line, and he has here. He's actually shown Elisha what Gehazi's been up to. He's taken him there in the spirit. So Elisha has seen what Gehazi has done. He knows. And now we get this confrontation where Gehazi goes back into Elisha, who knows what he's been doing. And the first question that Elisha... Oh, by the way, I should mention this, shouldn't I? Before I do that. Did you notice the difference between how Elisha sees the situation and what Gehazi does? Elisha said the same thing as Gehazi. Gehazi says the same thing as Elisha, minus one phrase. Elisha says, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve. That's the phrase that Gehazi couldn't say. They can both say, as surely as the Lord lives, but only one of them can say, whom I serve. And there's the difference. Do you serve God? Gehazi didn't. He served himself. But now he goes into Elisha, and Elisha knows. And Elisha asks him a question. He went in and stood before his master. Elisha asked him, where have you been, Gehazi? Good question. But he knows. See, God is terribly patient. And even now, right at the end of it, he gives him one final chance. Come clean, Gehazi. Where have you been? And even now, I think if Gehazi had turned to Elisha and said, I've done a terrible thing, I really need to get this dealt with, things could have been all right. But sometimes God puts you on a spot where you've got a choice to make. When we used to pick somebody up, Liz and I used to pick somebody up from prison in Kirkham to come to church. If you know the area around Kirkham, you come off the motorway and in heading to the prison, there's a little bypass around Kirkham that has about 3 or 4 roundabouts. And for the first 3, you can go left towards Kirkham, right away from it, or straight on. You can hedge your bets and go straight on. And you can do that at the first roundabout, and at the second, and at the third. But at the 4th, there's no ahead option. It's left or right. You can go towards the prison or away from it. And sometimes God allows you to go straight on, straight on, straight on, until the point at which he says, enough is enough. You've now got to choose left or right. And that's the scary one. Gehazi's at that point. Which way are you going to go? Where have you been? Now is your chance, Gehazi. And what does he say? Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. You had the last opportunity. Now the door shuts. Gehazi is now not allowed to say one more word. It's not that Elisha turns to him and says, I know, I was there, I saw you. And so Gehazi can go, oh yeah, well in that case I'll tell you the truth. No, it's too late. I gave you the opportunity and now the door shuts. You've had all these years to deal with that problem. You didn't. You focused on you. You haven't dealt with it. Now I'm giving you one last chance. You've blown it. And the consequences are horrible. The consequences are this. Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. That's hard, isn't it? That's hard. But it's the consequence of not dealing with it for Gehazi. When he went to Naaman and said, I want to get something from him, that wasn't what he had in mind. Leprosy. But that's what he got. And if it seems harsh that his descendants get it as well, then perhaps some people need to go into a waiting room before visiting day in a prison. When all the prisoners are assembling in the visiting room, and in the waiting room, you've got the girlfriends, the wives, with their babies and their little toddlers and their kids in pushchairs. And then we understand sometimes that when we get it wrong, when we mess up, it doesn't just affect us, it has a knock-on effect upon so many other people. And if we get it wrong, we're not the only ones who can suffer for it. And Gehazi experiences that big time. So that's why this is hard, this is tough, and so on. We had a great day yesterday, but this brings it down to earth, I'm afraid. Brings it down to earth. See, I am not suggesting, by the way, that if you don't deal with any issues you've got, hey, guess what? Leprosy. You know, it's not that. I said this is extreme, but something happens. I remember when I was an alcoholic in that time in my relationship with God, it was like wading through treacle. That was a kind of consequence, in addition to the pain and the suffering and the stuff that it gives to people like Liz and anybody else around, whatever other effect I had. But Christianity was really difficult. It was wading through treacle. It was hard work. And sometimes it can be that. If you discover in the end that what God said, I'm fed up waiting for you, so I'm going to give the blessing that I was going to give to you to somebody else, and just bypasses you. Perhaps it's that. Perhaps you just struggle a bit more. I don't know what the consequences will be. It depends. But there must be some. This is extreme. We're not going that far. But the point is, there will be some. So, when we do that moral inventory, and we've got the good stuff, the desire to serve God, and we want to put it into God's hands, great. Sit back and wait for God to use it. But we've got to do something with the negative stuff as well. We have to get it dealt with. See, our mate in prison who's got the anger problems, he's not going to sit there and have his anger problems taken away nice and easy. He's going to have to work at it. He's going to have to do stuff. He's going to have to come out of prison. He's going to have to go to meetings. And he's going to have to go to meetings regularly. And he's going to have to talk to people. He's going to have to work at it. And he will struggle at it because it's not that simple. And I do know, by the way, that God can take all this stuff away from you, because God can do anything. But we can't rely upon the fact that God's going to do it supernaturally when he says, look, I gave you the ability to choose, and you chose to do it wrong. Now choose to do it right. And I want to see you work at it. And that's where we need to go, and that's where we are. Now, as I said, it gets easier in step 6. It's a bit more cheerful and so on. But I can't soften this one. Lovely day yesterday. Down to earth today. So that's it, folks. Step 5 is a toughie. I'll give you that. But if you do have not, so we're obviously not going to do an altar call now. Do come to the front if you've got some serious problem that's going to cause you leprosy. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to do that to anybody. Ooh, everybody's suddenly looking round thinking, well, what problems he got, and so on. But whatever you discover in that inventory, deal with it, because the job that we've been called to do is too important to have anything that holds you back. Deal with it before it becomes some kind of, effect, some kind of stronghold in your life, as it did with Gehazi. He never dealt with it. He had every opportunity. And the consequences were massive. Okay, so I'm going to sneak off here and leave it before you kind of throw things at me on this one. But God bless you anyway. Yeah.